Welcome to Doctors at Work. My name is Matt Daniel, and this podcast is part of my mission to help doctors create successful and meaningful careers. Today's topic is how to be a great communicator, and I'm having a discussion with Felicity Dwyer. Now, of course, communication is a key skill for all of us as doctors, and is particularly important for those of us that work within teams or that have leadership roles. Felicity tells me that her top tips are: be a good listener, be flexible with your communication style, and have self-awareness. We talk about what gets in the way of good listening and good communication, and also on how one can adapt to different people and to different preferences for communication in a way that we bring everybody into the conversations that we have. Welcome, Felicity. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Matt. I'm a professional facilitator, trainer and coach. I've been working in learning development for over 20 years, and I specialise in helping people develop team leadership skills with a particular focus on effective communication.
And the topic for us today is how to be a great communicator. And of course, that's very relevant to all of us as doctors because we communicate with colleagues, people above us, below us, sideways, various teams, various other professionals, as well as the patients that we serve all the time. So we're going to focus on that kind of teamwork and leadership communication. And what makes a great communicator?
I think there's a few foundational aspects, and first and foremost, it's being a good listener. If you can't listen well, you can't communicate well. You can't hear the language people use, you can't hear people's perspectives and respond to that. So that's my absolute foundational skill, being a good listener. And secondly, I think you need to be flexible in your communication. We all have different communication styles, and something that feels comfortable to you might not resonate with another person. So just being aware of how people seem to prefer to communicate can help you responding in kind and make it more likely that, what you're saying will be heard. And the third, and also really important, the underpinning aspect, is self-awareness. So that's becoming aware, for example, of triggers you may have, things that may cause you to react emotionally, which can get in the way of clarity in response, or biases that you might have, which we all have by nature of, having a brain. So things that might get in the way, and the more you can be aware of them, the more you can make allowances for them. You can understand where you might not be fully able to listen. So, that underpins it all, I think. Self-awareness, listening skills, and then flexibility in response.
Let's go through each of those one by one. Let's start with listening skills, because I don't know what your normal workplace is like, but so often we're so busy, time is really pressured, or decisions have to be made really quickly. Everybody's rushing, from one meeting or from one thing to the next, or from one patient to the next. And it feels like finding somebody to listen is quite a rarity. What is a good listener? What makes a good listener, and how do we encourage good listening?
Oh, great question. I think there's a couple of things. I think firstly, and this will be one of my top tips, is that as an individual, we need to take responsibility to improve our listening. And that includes becoming aware of the things that get in the way for you. And they're different for everybody. Some people are quite distracted by external things going on, and that can get in the way. Sometimes it's internal things, it's just too much thinking, too many things you've got to do. So there's lots of different barriers, and we'll all recognize some of them. So it's recognizing that in yourself and finding a way when you're with somebody of bringing your attention back to the person. So I almost imagine, if I can feel my attention being drawn somewhere else, of physically pulling it back. And that works for me. For someone else, it might be having a little mantra, listen now, something that brings you back to that present moment and being with the person. And something that I found really powerful, it's not a technique. I'm not sure that listening techniques help. I think what really helps is the intention. So to go in with your conversation, remind yourself, I'm going to listen to this person. So that's one thing, it's in yourself. Also within a team, and I appreciate we're all busy, we all have too many meetings, but really thinking about how can you structure a meeting so that everybody has time to be heard, so that everybody gets the opportunity to contribute their perspective, and making sure there's some kind of structure around that so somebody doesn't dominate the meeting time. And so something really simple, like just going around and saying, you know, for each person, you've got a minute or two just to tell me your thoughts on this, go round, then open it up briefly to, okay, any other thoughts that have been triggered by that. It just can provide, I mean, you might think, oh, it's more people speaking, but you know, if the meetings aren't too big, if team meeting isn't too big, actually giving a structured but time limited space for everybody to contribute allows more ideas to get put on the table, and then you need a little bit of time at the end, and you can actually use the time more effectively. The one person taking all the meeting time, others feeling they haven't had a chance, people not listening because they're just thinking, when can I get my viewpoint? But if people know they're going to have an opportunity to speak, it paradoxically can make it easier to listen.
Some of the meetings that I've been in, they have been exactly as you've outlined, dominated by a number of people. Often it's me, Felicity, that nominates meetings. At least I've got self-awareness, some of it at least. So I've already moved to point 3. But I think one of the challenges that sometimes I find is that there's a meeting and there are a number of people that are very dominant and they do all the talking, and other people don't. So what stops people from contributing, or how do we change a team meeting to make sure that everybody gets to contribute?
Okay, again, that's a really good question, and it will fundamentally come down to a good facilitator or chair. So if you are a team leader, then either learn how to facilitate well, or you can rotate the facilitation role. It doesn't always have to be the team leader who facilitates. But as I said before, I think it's really useful to have a structure. If you've got a larger meeting, something that can be helpful is, before everybody speaks, invite people to share with one colleague. So give them a couple of minutes to share with a colleague, what are your thoughts on this? Because some people find that easier in a smaller, in a pair or a smaller group. Also, for the meeting with the agenda, people won't want to read a lot of information before agenda, but if you just put the key questions that you're going to discuss, phrasing them in the form of questions, and this is a technique from Nancy Klein, can help people to start thinking ahead of the meeting. Or even if you've asked a question, giving people a minute just to make some notes before asking people to contribute. And the reason is that just helps people who have a more introverted thinking style, who need to think before they speak, rather than some people, they think as they speak. The speaking helps them think.
Yeah.
Other people, giving people a little bit of time to think first can help encourage contributions for them. And as I said before, I think it's really important to actually offer everybody a chance to contribute by name, if the meeting is of a size to allow it. They don't have to contribute. They might say, I've got nothing to add, but it's that inviting people in by name, because there's evidence that if you don't do that, it is a small number, as you said, that will dominate. And the more some people dominate, particularly if they're senior, if senior people speak early on, it makes it harder for more junior people on the team to feel that they can contribute. So that's one aspect of it. I could say more, but I'll stop now.
So I guess the key thing there then is, if you are a senior member in the team, then if we said that the key to being a great communicator is listening. So if you are a senior member of the team, start by listening rather than sort of start by talking. One of the challenges I think with listening is that time pressure. But I really like your comment that there's intentionality behind it, that you consciously choose to prioritize that. There's no particular sort of magic skill or behavior or something that you do, but it's just a conscious decision that you are going to pay attention and you are going to listen to the person in front of you. And I guess when everybody's life is so busy, why does listening matter so much?
It matters because, and you'll know this as a coach, of course, that when you're listening to somebody, it can help the other person think better. And Nancy Klein calls this generative listening. I think it comes from the work of David Bone initially. So listening to people can help them think better. It also creates a sense of safety within the team. And one model I find quite helpful is Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. And he talks about, if you want to have a really high-performing, cohesive team, fundamentally you need to establish trust. And you do that by giving people space to speak and share what's going on for them, for willing sometimes to be a bit vulnerable and open as a leader as well. You might not have all the answers. And by doing that, you can create an environment where people feel more comfortable in saying, look, I don't agree with this, or I'm not sure this will work, or I have a different view. So listening to people with respect, with mutual respect, making it known that you really do want to hear what people say, that can help build a trust within the team. So, it's all in service of building trust and people then feeling it's okay to say what I think, even if it's different to what the leader says, or have you thought about this, or in my experience, patients struggle with this. Sometimes people just have a different perspective because of their different level in the organization. So it's really being open to that. I think there's a balance between, if you're a doctor, you're an expert, obviously, but as a team leader or team member, there's also a need to bring in a humility, if you like, to balance it a little bit as well, to say, well, I don't know everything. There's other people in the team who have something really valuable to say, and I'm curious. That's my other tip, being curious, just interested a little bit about, I wonder, how she sees it. What does it look like from his perspective? And I think bringing that in really does, it just helps, and people can feel it. I talked about that self-awareness. It's not so much a set of behaviors you put on, it's something that you really try and bring in and think, well, okay, I'm going to try and stay interested a little bit longer.
I think that's quite difficult to do, or at least for some people. If people have spent 20 years developing their career, they become a senior doctor in whatever area they are, and then to go from there, from being, a real recognized expert in whatever you do, to then all of a sudden saying, I wonder what so and so thinks, I wonder what so and so thinks, and everybody's thinking like, why does Matt want to know like what I think? Sort of he's the consultant, or he's the boss. So why do those kind of things matter?
I think they really do matter because they're part of what's been shown to be more effective as a leadership style. So if I can bring in a little bit more theory, a leadership book that I love is The New Leaders by Daniel Goleman, which is based on emotional intelligence. And he talks about different leadership styles. So a couple of the styles that he calls dissonant styles, which are styles that can cause a lack of harmony within the team, are the commanding style, which is effectively when you're telling people what to do, or the pace setting style, where you're really setting that fast pace. And it can be very effective with a very skilled, high performing team. You may be a style that works in surgery. You have the expertise to comment on that. But if that is your only style, if you're always coming in as the expert when it comes to teamwork, then people can end up feeling almost like a little bit anxious and on edge all the time, and that affects performance. So Goleman talks about some of the other styles that have been shown to be more effective. For example, the visionary style, which encourages people to see where the team could go, or the coaching style, which focuses on developing people, or the affiliative style, which is about helping to build good relations within the team. And he calls some of those styles resonant styles because it's where a leader's attuned to the feelings of the group, and it can encourage people to just feel a little bit safer. And of course, when we feel safer, we're better able to think logically. We're just more relaxed. So it's really the case of do people feel relaxed enough to do their best thinking, make good decisions? So it really, really does matter within a team setting that that you bring as much emotional intelligence, if you like, as you can.
So even if somebody's a senior leader and the only thing they're interested in is performance and outcomes, speed, clinical outcomes, whatever it might be, there's a recognition that actually listening and giving everybody space to talk, that's something that supports the overall vision that might be efficient transformation, patient care, whatever that vision might be. I'm interested in these different leadership styles. Are these things that are exclusive of each other, sort of, or maybe we're moving into flexibility? How does one move between those different styles? When are they good? How do you choose where you go?
Okay, it's a great question, and a good leader will be flexible in the styles that they can bring to a situation. So if you've got an emergency situation, which is clearly sometimes the case in clinical situations, then quite a commanding style can be very effective. You just need people to be here, there, and get things done. So it's absolutely effective there. However, a good leader will know when that's not needed, when the team know what they need to do already. So therefore, it just might be a case of checking and, do you need support from anyone in the team at the moment? So it's being able to flex between styles. And that comes back to that point of self-awareness, like where are you most comfortable and where could you develop further? What could you try? So it does require flexibility. But it starts with self recognition, which isn't always easy. I mean, I've certainly come across people who are pace setters and think they're really democratic. So, people don't always know. So you have to be willing to be open to feedback. And again, this can be challenging if you're used to being the expert, to actually be open to actually what could I be doing better. And Jennifer Garvey Berger has a question in her book Leadership Mind Traps, and she talks about I think the question is, how could I be wrong? And she said this stops people getting into the state of, who I am now, preventing me from being who I could be. So I may have a leadership style that works in some situations, but where does it not work? And therefore, how could I be more? How could I have more options available? So it's that being willing to be uncomfortable by suddenly realizing there's some areas where you could be better. But once you've realized that, you've got the chance to change and improve and continue to grow as a leader and person.
I hope you're enjoying the show. Please click subscribe so you'll be notified when new episodes become available. This podcast is part of my mission to help doctors create successful and meaningful careers. You can be part of that mission too by forwarding this show to one person who you think might benefit from listening. Thank you. Now on with the show. It sounds as an unknown that people will have one leadership style, wherever that came from. Or in fact, maybe, where do our leadership behaviors and where does our communication behavior, where does it all come from?
I suspect the answer for that starts in the family of origin, doesn't it? And what we observe, and there's cultural issues involved. So yeah, I think that's a complex question. I don't think there's a simple answer to that one.
So wherever it comes from, we develop one style of communicating and one style of leadership, or some of us will, but I guess that some of us won't realize that might serve us in some circumstances, and perhaps we've honed it to perfection because it serves us in one particular setting. And maybe, at least if I think sort of in surgery, that kind of very directive, that's really, really useful, sort of if you're the person that's in charge of an emergency situation, but it's a terrible style when it comes sort of to trying to develop a new project or engage the team in something that's transformative. So I mean, how do I know whether I have insight or not?
Oh, I think there's a few things. I mean, the reflective practice. So actually reflecting on, how did that go? What did I learn? What could I have done differently is important. And you can do that with a coach, so someone like yourself, or with a journal. So I think taking a bit of reflective practice, the Chartered Management Institute calls reflective practice a high-level leadership skill. But again, if you've been quite externally focused, it's a little bit of a shift to do it, to actually take that step back and look at myself. So that's one aspect, whether you do it with a coach or whether you do it through reflection, or you'll have different kinds of supervision, obviously. The other way is through feedback and finding ways to gather feedback. And of course, that can be done, at the organizational level, such as a 360 process. It can be done through asking your team in direct reports. Be mindful that people sometimes are reluctant to give critical feedback to a more senior person. So think about how you phrase it. It's a lot easier if you phrase it along the lines of, you know, is there anything more I could be doing to manage you better? So inviting constructive suggestions rather than criticism, because that tends to be a bit easier for people. And also, it's the other thing when it comes to feedback is just being aware of your own reactions to feedback. So if you hear something that hits you and you think, oh, wasn't expecting that, or it's that's not good, I don't like that, you know, making sure you take a breath and don't react to it, give it a little bit of time, think about it. I mean, it may not be fair. Somebody's feedback is only one person's opinion, but if somebody does offer you some feedback, you know, take the time to reflect on it, maybe talk it through with someone you trust, you know, see it as something useful.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Is that it's what somebody thinks, you know, of me or you or of somebody else, and I mean, chances are that not everybody in the world will like everyone. Yeah, I mean, you know, that's reality, isn't it? But it's kind of thinking what does that say about how people perceive me or whoever is asking for feedback. The particular thing whenever I do any courses or anything, I tend to ask, you know, what was good, what would you like more of, what would you like less of, and sort of, and those kind of three questions strike me as being relevant in this context, because it's not about on a scale of 1 to 10 how brilliant is Felicity, yeah, you know, or what are Felicity's weaknesses or Matt's weaknesses. It's not about that, but it's you know, what could Felicity or what could Matt do more of, what could Matt do less of. There's no particular judgment implied in that, and maybe that makes it easier for me to process, or for you to process, or for somebody else to process, but more importantly, probably gives it easier for people to give feedback, because otherwise, you know, most of us will try and be positive with each other, won't we? And, you know, and that's fine, but it might not be what actually a leader looks for, because, you know, because if a leader's trying to develop, they want developmental feedback, not stuff that just massages their ego. Yeah. Yeah. I like this idea of being flexible, and, you know, you talked before also about being flexible in communication style, in that different people benefit from different ways of communication. Can you tell me a bit more? Maybe give me some examples about different communication styles.
Yes, absolutely. The model I tend to use for this is called DISC, and I quite, you know, like a lot of these models, you know, you can do more in-depth versions, but if you're thinking of a model that you can just use to help you day to day, the simple version of it thinks of 4 different communication styles, really. And the idea is you start by thinking, well, what are my communication styles or preferences? So it's a behavioural model. We're not trying to analyse personality, but what are my styles or preferences? And what are other people that I work with? What do I think their styles or preferences are? And is there a way that I can adjust what I do to adapt to them?
Okay.
So I'll just give you some examples. So you've got a direct communication style. People who communicate directly want to keep it short, clear, and to the point.
Yeah.
So it's a very useful style, obviously, in emergency situations, but it can be perceived by others who don't share this preference as being quite abrupt or, you know, even rude, particularly if they don't know the person. So if that's your style, you might think, okay, what do I need to do to adjust, to soften a little bit with people who don't respond so well to this style?
Yeah.
Or if you have a colleague who has this style, you know, and you haven't, you might want to think to yourself, okay, I need to do a bit of my thinking before I ask them for something so that I can keep it concise and clear, and they will ask me if they want more information. So it's 2 ways. It's recognizing, is that my style, or is there a colleague who has that style and therefore I can adapt?
You've nailed me to a T, Felicity. I think I'll be interested in what the others are, but that's totally me, and I'm laughing because whenever people send me an email, I always think, what do you want from me? And I always think, why do you just tell me what you want from me? Number one, and number two, whenever I send email, the feedback that I normally get is, can I put some kisses on the end, and maybe a please and a thank you rather than just a yes, yeah. But for me, it's like, well, just it's a yes or a no, so it's like, why do I need to put kisses on the end of emails? But but yeah, so sometimes, in fact, that reminds me next time that I send my secretary an email, I'll need to put some kisses on the end, sort of, because that's what she likes at the end of the email. So okay, so what? Okay, so tell me more. What are the others then? What are the other styles?
Okay, I'll go through the styles. I go through an influencing style, so I have quite a lot of this in my makeup. So in influence, it's quite an outgoing style, and it's quite a people-focused style. So an influencer will like to sort of think things through by talking. They're probably quite confident speaking in a meeting, and they might like presenting. So that's the style. So the way to engage with people who have an influencer style is ask some questions, making it very two-way. They will switch off if they're talked at for too long, but if it's engaging and two-way, they'll feel much more involved and more likely to be happy with what's being discussed. So both of those styles are quite outgoing styles, the direct and the influencing.
Can I just pause, Felicity, because that also sounds like me. So is it possible that we're in different groups at the same time? Yeah.
Oh yes, and you can be close to the border. I mean, I'm actually an IS, so I'm between the I and the S style. So people may comfortably use more than one style, and you do have to be careful if you're using the model just as a rule of thumb. You can't know for sure people's preferences. You can just pick up on clues from your experience speaking with them. So the next two styles are more reserved styles. So the steady style is a people-focused but more reserved style, and these are the people who like the kisses, who like the how was your weekend, and like those real sort of social interactions. And the people with the S style, they will not tend to like being put on the spot. So they're the people at meetings that might need a little bit of thinking time, or just to clarify their ideas with the partner first. Then you can get more out of S style people. And I work with, when I've done training in the NHS, I've found quite a lot of S style people within the NHS setting. And the fourth style is the conscientious style, and that's, again, it's a little more reserved and it's a more task focused style. So like the direct style, it's quite task focused, and these people are quite good on detail. They like reassurance, can be a bit risk averse, want all the information before they make a decision. So again, if you're communicating with somebody with this conscientious style, it's probably not effective to push them too much into a decision before they've had a chance to think things through. If you are a conscientious style of communicator, be careful not to give people too much detail. You need to be able to pull out the key points to communicate effectively. That's the main challenge I see with conscientious style, is you get an awful lot of detail, and people can switch off a bit if they're not so detail focused. So each style has its benefits, but if you can be flexible and adjust the way you communicate, it will have more impact. And it's quite fun when you start knowing about these styles. You can notice them in emails, and you can start making assumptions, but be aware that they are just assumptions. That's the thing. Ultimately, you'll only know if your communication is effective by the response. So if you try something a bit different and you get a good response, think, oh, that's working with this person. If you don't get a great response, try something different, or
And I'm liking this idea of understanding the other person, because again, if I kind of think, with my email example, when people send me email and I think, oh, just tell me what you want me to do, and then particularly if that sort of comes from somebody who's conscientious, who does give me sort of an enormous amount of details, and I kind of quickly trying to read through emails, like what do I need to do, and sort of and none the wiser. So is that when you talk about flexibility, it's that understanding where in those four, if we use that as a model, where in those four might I sit for preference, and where might other people sit for preference, and then adjusting. So in my mind, I've kind of got a 4x4 matrix as to what does a D person have to do with an S person, and what does an I person have to do with a C person. Is that kind of how it sort of works, how we adjust to each other?
Yeah, I mean, it's firstly recognizing your own preferences, then adjusting to other people, and there's good. I mean, I use the everything disc, sometimes in programs. Insights discovery is a very well-known version of the model that some people use. So it can be useful to use the actual questionnaire within the team, because then you'll get a lot more information, you know, about what people's styles are. But the reason I like the model is you don't have to know everybody's style to be able to use the model as a way of thinking, okay, I can see that if I put this person on the spot, I'm not getting a good response. So maybe I'll try, you know, giving her a bit more thinking time, or saying something I'd appreciate is you come into the meeting with some thoughts about this, and just notice, am I getting a better contribution from the person? So, you know, it's you can see the model and you can map people and you can try things. But just be aware that you don't know for sure. But it's useful, and it's you know, I find people find it quite enlightening. I mean, I've talked about it briefly in my book. There's, you know, lots of different models out there, as I said, of this. The basic DISC model isn't copyright, so that's why I've covered it in my book. But there's various proprietary people who develop their own versions with their own names that, you know, you can usually pay a small fee and get a diagnostic of your own style or the team style.
Yeah. So I like the idea then that we're all different, and you know, and I've got a preferred communication style, wherever that's come from. But you and other people around me will have their own preferred communication style, and then it's about sort of how we adjust to each other to make sure that we get the best. Because again, you know, if I use sort of, you know, my example, you know, with the emails is you know, that somebody likes me to put kisses, and I kind of thinking like, why? And you know, somebody else sort of writes lots and lots of details, and you know, that kind of frustrates me. But equally, I see the value in kisses in emails, and likewise I see the value in sort of in somebody who produces a really detailed outline, a really detailed email that looks at everything. So there's real value in all of that, and that, you know, recognizing that we're all different, and that means that we are making different contributions to the team as a whole. And you know, and if we were all, presumably, if we were all, you know, I don't know, you know, if we were all in that, what was it, conventional? What was the C again? Last category.
Conscientious.
Conscientious. That's it. So you know, if we were all the same, yeah, I mean, what would that be a problem if everybody in the team was a C, or everybody was a D or an I or an S? Would that be a problem? Would that be good or bad?
I think it could lead to problems. You could, I mean, what I want to not get into is this, you know, turning this into a personality assessment rather than a communication model assessment. Although some people do think it's personality, but I don't see it that way. I see it very much as behavioural styles. I think if you've got too many Ds, you could have very terse communication. You know, too many S's, perhaps there would be not enough focus on task, because you've got the task and people focus. You know, having a mix of people who are more focused on the task and more focused on, you know, the people and relationships, you know, can be healthy if we find a way to work together. If we go back to the point you made earlier about, you know, you've got maybe a senior person, a senior doctor who is very task focused, outcome focused, which is great. However, it's important to have more people focused people in the team who can help create that trust. And you know, it's if we just had task focused people, it could be quite a cold working environment. We'd lose something. So I think there's benefits to having different types of people within a team, and people are attracted to certain roles, perhaps because of their you know, their interest in detail, or because they like speaking to people. You know, you may get quite a lot of coaches, for example, that are quite people focused, but not necessarily all. So yeah, again, you'll get accountants who are C types, you'll get accountants who are not. You know, it's.
I like that idea that you know, there's a role for people might have preferences, and there's something to be said for adapting to each other and being conscious of what our own preferences are. And you talked about flexibility. So we talk about flexibility as in how I adjust to you, or you know, how the two of us adjust our preferred behaviorals. But presumably flexibility also means adapting to different situations.
Yes. So you're thinking of a specific example?
Well, we talked about the idea there's an emergency situation, and there's a type of communication that works well for that, or we're talking about, a project that's around service reconfiguration transformation, and that will need a very different style of communication.
Absolutely, 100% agree. So if you say you're developing something new, you might be wanting to use quite a democratic style, bringing to different people's views. If you've got conflict within a team, you might be needing to help people resolve that by creating quite a safe space for people to be heard and actually air the conflicts, thinking about how people can word it so it doesn't become personal attacks, but it becomes more an expression of, concerns. So and that's a different skill set to just being very clear in issuing tasks. So yes, absolutely different skills. And I think this is where you do not have to be good at everything to be a good leader. There's a Harvard Business Review article, I think it's called In Praise of the Incomplete Leader, which talks about the idea that you have to be a leader and brilliant at everything is not correct. A good leader knows their strengths and also, knows whether the other people within the team who can step up and perhaps lead in certain areas. So again, it comes back to that self-awareness and not trying to be good at everything, to build the skills you need to be better. And also knowing, where does leadership lie? Maybe the leadership of this project needs to lie with somebody who's really strong in that skill set.
Yeah.
So that's also a leadership skill, really, distributing, knowing people.
We're kind of moving into the third thing, which was around, self-awareness. What am I good at, or what the leader is good at, and if I think that when it comes to communication, I guess the telling you where I've seen problems, I've seen maybe issues where people had one way of doing stuff, and no matter what the situation, sort of the same thing. So that kind of maybe links into the fact that that person wasn't particularly flexible, which is problem number one. But problem number two, they didn't realize that sort of the different stuff is going on for different people. And then also, I've also seen people where they have no idea what they leave behind. Yeah, sort of, I think, we talk about the shadow effect, yeah, that, somebody comes and does something and then they leave, and, they leave a shadow behind, and that person doesn't necessarily know that they've got that. So we touched upon a little bit about self-awareness, but can you tell me a bit more about how I guess sort of what one does with that? Because, we talked about the idea of reflecting and paying attention to what's going on. We talked about the idea of a 360. Yeah. Anything else to say about self-awareness, or have we covered it?
I think it does. It is important to be aware that we all have blind spots, and I think most people think that they're quite self-aware. I like to think I'm quite self-aware. However, you have to sort of accept, if you accept that everybody has blind spots, then that's when you can be open to it. Because I think what can get in the way of self-awareness can be the fact that, well, I already have it. I'm very self-aware. And I have heard this sometimes. And the fact is, and this is where coaching is so powerful, of course, because sometimes it's a question somebody asks you, just a gentle question, you realize you don't know how to answer it. And that can be quite, quite insightful. So I think there is a certain need to be open to it. I think this is almost a prerequisite for thinking, well, what don't I yet know? And sometimes the Joe Harry window models one I find quite helpful here, because it talks about our blind spots, which can be grown or reduced rather through feedback. And then it talks about, the open area, which is the part of ourselves that we show up. And then I think there's a hidden area, which is the part that we choose not to show, perhaps. So that could be some of our vulnerabilities or insecurities. And sometimes appropriate disclosure of those can be helpful at work. Not always, it has to be appropriate disclosure. But also there is a hidden area. And these are things that we don't know, but others don't know about us. And they may not emerge until a situation triggers them. So, for example, it could be a personal crisis that we go through, and it's not until we're tested that we actually realize, maybe we're stronger than we thought, or maybe we're not as confident as we thought we were, and maybe there's, and we don't know until circumstances test us. So, feedback and self-reflection, self-development, coaching are the two main methods that I think we can look for, but life itself will throw up tests. And if we're open to learning from it, if we have that growth mindset of, oh, this is an opportunity to learn something, it's uncomfortable, but I can learn from it, then, life will give us those opportunities.
We're all work in progress.
We are. Yeah.
I wonder if I could bring us to a close, Felicity. Maybe if I could ask you to summarize, what would be your top tips for doctors at work?
Yes, so my top tips are to, firstly, to learn to listen really well. And it doesn't need to take more time than not listening. In fact, it allows you to take information in first time. To recognize that your preferred style of communication is not probably the only one, and be aware of, how you might make the most of people on the team by understanding, their style. Do they need a bit more thinking time? Do they need a bit more detail? Do they need interaction and questions? Give feedback, good feedback, and good feedback, which I don't think we talked about too much, but good feedback is really clear and evidence-based. So you're providing evidence that this is the situation, this is what, I observed that you did, and this was the impact. And then use that as a starting point for a conversation, so, what did it look like from your perspective, or what might you do differently next time? So use that to start a conversation. And I think the last thing, actually, which I haven't talked about before, but just seek peers you admire who, might not be within your team, but perhaps in different roles elsewhere in the organisation, or similar roles, or in other organisations. Get a good network of people who face some of the same challenges as you, because they're probably approaching it from a little bit of a different perspective. So that can be really helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.